Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and when I watch these hearings, I really try to focus in on some of the people that are not necessarily the big stars that everybody's looking for. But one of the things that I noticed this past week was that all of the House fal-de-ral, the entire drama that was going on with the House Judiciary took the focus off this hearing. And this was the hearing in the Senate where they were questioning Inspector General Horowitz. Now, of course, the Democrat part was pretty much the same script that we're used to hearing. But if you watch this, you understand what Horowitz was really saying about this whole debacle that happened with the FBI, and he is not supporting it. Now, of course, if you've been listening to the mainstream media, you're hearing that, oh, he said there's no bias, there's no bias, there's no bias. And I said this last time, a year ago in June, when that one came out and they were saying, oh, he said no bias. That's not what he says. Okay, that is not at all what he says, and I'm very glad that some of the senators that were in this hearing asked him point blank about this. Now, I doubt if you've been hearing this, but he definitely states that he's not at all ruling out bias. It's just the way that he has to work. And I want to play some clips for you. First of all, Senator Crapo did an excellent job. And if you can listen to the whole questioning that he did, it lasts about 11 minutes. So it is kind of long, and I don't want to play the whole clip because I need to do commentary on it. And by the time I got done with all of these clips, it'd be really, really long. But I did want to point out some things. And so if you hear me rustling, I have a paper. I'm kind of like Rush Limbaugh today, I guess, because I needed to remind myself of all of these. But with the first thing that he talks about is he clarifies exactly what was going on here with Horowitz and how Horowitz views this whole idea of bias. Okay, and there were other people later on who did it as well, but I want to play this one to start out with. So here's the first clip.
Thank you.
Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, I join with everybody else, Mr. Horowitz, for thanking you and your team for the work that you have done here. I'm going to go back to an issue that's been talked about by many of my colleagues today, and that is this question of bias. And actually, I want to start by going back to June of 2018, when you were last here before the committee. Mm-hmm. And when I asked questions of you at that time, I had talked about your findings then with regard to bias. The specific focus that I recall there was Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and the information that's already been well presented here about what I consider to be the undeniable bias that they had against the President Trump. At that time, you made similar statements to those you made today, which is that you did not find bias in the decisions that you were evaluating in that report. But as I went through that with you, I think that you also confirmed that you were not saying that there was no bias by those who were involved in making decisions. Rather, you were saying you could not prove that that bias was a factor in their management of the activities they engaged in on behalf of the FBI. As I understood it, you said that there was bias, but in fact that you had asked them whether their bias influenced their work performance. They had told you that it did not, and you had no contrary evidence to dispute that. Is that correct?
Let me clarify. Let me explain. We found that those text messages evidenced bias, and what we ultimately found was that other people were involved and made many of those decisions, not them, and that was the base, not because we didn't know whether they were biased. Those texts evidenced bias by them.
All right.
The question was the other individuals who we didn't have text messages for, otherwise evidence of bias by those individuals.
And that would be consistent with what your report here today says. As I'm reading from the executive summary, Deputy Attorney General, I believe that's his title, Priestap.
Assistant Director or Deputy Assistant Director, depending upon the time period.
he's the one who made the final decision to open each of the 4 investigations.
Correct.
He did that in consultation with a number of others, including Peter Strzok.
Correct.
And you don't necessarily know what advice was given in those conversations, do you?
I don't.
But he made the final decision, and because you had and you've used the phrase very consistently here today, you did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation influenced the decision to open these 4 investigations.
Right.
Did you ask Mr. Priestap whether he had bias?
We asked all the witnesses, not just him, as to whether bias or other improper considerations had any impact. But we also looked for emails, text messages, documents that could show what we found, frankly, was Strzok and Page. I mean, if that is how you find evidence of bias. Now, beyond that, I'm stuck trying to understand what's in somebody's head if there's no other.
I just want to make it really clear what it is you are saying and what you are not saying.
Correct.
And in this case, what you're saying is that you could not find any documentary or testimonial evidence to contradict the statements of the investigators that they were not letting bias influence their decision.
Correct.
Now, I want to point out this part about Bill Priestap. Here's the deal. He's the one who, they say, opened the investigation. The thing is, when he's talking about the opening of the investigation and that there was no bias found, is that there was no evidence that there was any bias. Now, here's the thing about bias. It's really hard to prove. And unless you have text messages like Strzok and Page, it's hard to say someone was biased, and that's why they opened it. Now, remember, Horowitz is limited to just the people in the DOJ and the FBI. That's all he can look at. That's all he has control over. So he can't go outside of that. And Durham is doing all that outside stuff. And listen to this clip from Barr from that NBC interview. And by the way, I got it from this one, Body Language Ghost. If you're not familiar with her, she does a really good job of reading body language. And, you know, I really like listening to her, but I wanted to play this little clip. I will also put the link down below for the actual NBC News clip that it came from originally. So I want to make sure that you have access to both of them. If you've not heard this interview, it lasts, I think it's approximately 25 minutes, maybe. And it really is very interesting what Barr has to say. So I recommend, I don't normally do this, but I recommend you take the NBC News link down below to watch this video because I think it's well worth watching. Anyway, so here is the clip.
To start this investigation was based on political bias. Do you agree?
Well, what do you actually, I think you have to understand what the IG's methodology is, and I think it's the appropriate methodology for an inspector general. He starts with limited information. He can only talk to people who are essentially there as employees, and he's limited to the information generally in the FBI. But his approach is to say, if I get an explanation from the people I'm investigating that is not unreasonable on its face, then I will accept it as long as there's not contradictory testimonial or documentary evidence. In other words, it's a very deferential standard. And all he said is, people gave me an explanation and I didn't find anything to contradict it, so I don't have a basis for saying that there was improper motive. But he hasn't decided the issue of improper motive.
So you can see what Barr was saying is basically what I've been telling you, that the way the Inspector General office is structured is that they're looking totally at procedures and processes and internal rules, because this is really what it is. It's an internal watchdog for that particular department. Well, the thing is, as Barr was saying, the Inspector General can only do so much, and he does not have the same jurisdiction as somebody who is a U.S. attorney like Durham, who has been tasked with investigating this no matter where it takes him. And, you know, the IG can't do that. Also, the IG can't impanel grand juries and all of those things. So that's not within his purview. And that's an important fact, because when you hear people saying there was no bias, you have to stop them and you have to say that's not what it says. It does not say there was no bias found. It says there's no evidentiary or documentary evidence. That means that they can't prove from documents that somebody had a bias. The people that opened this had a bias, which was Bill Priestap. Bill Priestap has nothing written. He didn't text somebody. He didn't write emails. There was nothing that he wrote down that would indicate he had a bias against Trump. Okay, that's the situation. That doesn't mean he didn't have a bias against Trump. It doesn't mean that he didn't open the investigation out of bias. All it means is there's no proof. You know, this is the thing. If you look at it and you look at all of the things that went on, you come to the conclusion that these people were either just totally incompetent or they did it intentionally. There's not a lot of leeway in there. And I want to play this clip of Kennedy because Senator Kennedy also pointed out the same thing.
So you didn't find any documents that said we did this to get Trump, right?
Or text messages like the struck page text messages.
And nobody who was involved in this circus without a tent looked you in the eye and said, yep, I did it to get Trump. Nobody did that.
Or, for example, a whistleblower come in or other people tell us they heard something.
None of the agents you talked to looked you in the eye and said, yeah, you're right, I did it to get Trump.
And nobody came in through a different means and said, I've got a problem here with this, what's going on.
I mean, you don't have to qualify as Mensa material to know not to do that to the Inspector General, right?
Yes, although look at some of the text messages we found. So I'm not sure.
I understand.
That may be a counter narrative to that.
Well, I don't want to get too, I don't know what's the word, epistemological here, but is the absence of evidence always the evidence of absence?
No, it isn't.
So can you rule out categorically, unequivocally, and unconditionally that there was no bias here by the fact that you didn't find anything in writing and none of these chuckleheads looked you in the eye and said, yeah, I did it to get Trump?
Well, yeah, it's rare that I could tell you at any point in time, I could unequivocally 100% say this actually happened. So I get it. I will say that somewhat the difference on the opening is we concluded, based on the evidence, that Mr. Priestap opened it. We have not seen in last year's investigation or this investigation, looking through texts, emails, et cetera, talking to other people, any evidence that he did it for a improper purpose. Can I tell you 1,000% someone won't walk in a week and say, aha, you missed this? But that's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's talk about the people involved in the initial FISA application and the renewals. These are experienced people, right?
In this case, these were experienced people.
Many of them had professional degrees, include but not limited to law degrees, right?
I actually don't know what all their degrees were.
Okay. They knew the law.
They should have not only known the law, they should have known every single policy that they had to deal with you.
I mean, they were handpicked by Mr. McCabe, right?
They were handpicked.
Okay. This wasn't their first rodeo.
It certainly wasn't, with maybe an exception or two towards the end, of relatively new agents coming on board.
Well,
but that to me, should not have been an excuse, just to be clear.
Well, it just seems to me that it has to be one or two things. Either incompetence or intentional conduct.
I agree.
So, honestly, folks, if you listen to Crapo and you listen to Kennedy and you listen to Marsha Blackburn, they were the last three, I think, to speak, if I remember correctly, in this hearing. And you can see it was actually even further than this. It lasted 6.5 hours. And I think, well, there was, breaks in there, but I think probably about 6 hours, 5.5 on was where it really got good. And unfortunately, people didn't hang in there for that part. And when you watch the news, if you ever notice on these hearings, a lot of times when you watch the news, you see a bunch of clips from the very beginning. You don't see so many clips from the end because everybody was getting tired. They don't want to pay attention that long. And a lot of times the news people watch the first part and they don't watch the rest. So the end of this hearing was actually the best because Horowitz said a lot of things that's not being reported on. He basically said that in his opinion, these people were either totally incompetent or they did it on purpose. He essentially said that. So I think it's very important for people to be aware of what's going on. And this particular hearing, like I said, I don't think it's by chance. I think it was totally by design that the Democrats planned their House antics at the same time this was going on, because they sure did not want people to hear this, because it was just flooring. I mean, I haven't had time to read the report yet. Honestly, I've just been so busy. And with all the hearings, that's all I've been able to do. I'm having trouble keeping up with that and getting my writing done. So, it's been tough. I haven't really gotten to it yet. It's 400 and some pages. And, so it's easy for me and a lot of other people to sit there and to say, oh, well, that I'll just listen to what everybody else has to say about it. I know, I need to get it read, and I will. It just takes a little bit of time. So by now, if you watched my last video, then you know that on Thursday night, the Democrats pulled a really sneaky move by ending things before they did the vote. And so this morning, I wake up and I think, okay, I got to watch this because who knows how long it's going to be. That one was 12 hours on Thursday. And the one on Friday lasted for like 5 minutes. All it did was take the vote. And it went right down the Democrats. They all said aye. And then went down the Republicans. They all said no. And then he gavelled it out. That was it. It was ludicrous. And so Nadler disrupted everyone's schedule for that. Now, I didn't know that that's all that was left when I did the other video. But I can understand now why Doug Collins was so ticked off, because it was like, what? You're bringing us back in for 10 minutes? Why not just stay 10 minutes longer and get it over with? But oh no, couldn't do that. Anyway, during that 12-hour long video, I did watch, as I told you, I watched part of it. Most of it was double speed, so it wasn't too painful. And the Republican stuff was good, but it was pretty much the same stuff over and over again because the charges that the Democrats were making were the same things over and over again, So I was kind of listening, and I had it on fast speed through everybody. Usually I slow it down on the Republicans, but it was like, no, fast speed everybody to this time. But there was a comment that Louis Gohmert made that y'all need to hear, okay? This one, Louis Gohmert just pops up out of nowhere and asks this question. And it's a question that I've been wanting to know about all along. So here's the Louis Gohmert comment.
They're all afraid. Some of their colleagues have said it straight up. They're all afraid that they can't beat him at the ballot box. So they're going to do this rigged, rushed, and wrong impeachment process. So I would urge a yes vote on the amendment. I would yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman.
Well, I just wanted to ask the gentleman from Ohio a question. Based on the standards the Democrats are asserting here, if somebody is in the House or Senate running for president and they support or push impeachment of the president, would they be subject to being expelled for abusing their position? Just curious.
Well, I think I'll let my colleague answer that question, but what I do know is I think my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are, as I said, nervous about their prospects next November against President Trump based on his amazing record of leadership in the last 3 years. With that, I would yield back. Thank you.
So, excellent question, Louis. Excellent question. Because every one of those, according to what the Democrats are saying here, every single one of those people who are DNC candidates for the presidency are all in exactly the same boat of what they're accusing Trump of having done. They are all abusing their power by using it to target a political opponent. Because that's who Trump is. And I said that a long time ago, remember? I said they all should have to recuse themselves. They shouldn't have anything to do with this whole Trump impeachment stuff. Because you can't sit in judgment against a person that you're going to be running against and be fair about it. You just can't. So anyway, that's what I've got on this one. I've got lots of little clips, and I will tell you that several of them I'd like to play. I'd just like to play them all through, but it'd be like an hour long. And, there was just a lot of material these past few days. I hope you found something in here interesting and that it picked up some of the things you may not have heard on the regular news. Well, that's what I've got for you on this one. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.